Welcome back to Decision 2024, brought to you by Valuetainment and VTnews.ai, where we get our news and we have an analytics engine in the back that's analyzing polls. We have a really big episode with a lot going on this week. First, we have headlines from California where Trump was campaigning and a near incident. Then we've got drama with Kamala. Are things really going well inside her campaign? We heard a couple of people that say, no, they're not. And this week we are covering betting. You wanted us to cover the betting markets. Very interesting results in there. A lot going on this week.
So first, let's dive into the historic event that just took place out in Coachella, California. This is a Democratic stronghold, but it did not stop 100,000 people from turning out to attend this rally. Now, there was a little bit of drama that went down. A third would-be assassination attempt. Of course, the person has been apprehended and will be coming out with more information about this. And then also some endorsements as well. We saw Dennis Quaid endorse Trump, and there was also the Border Patrol agents. We actually saw that the Border Patrol Union has come forward and endorsed Trump. They can't take another 4 years of what has been taking place at the border. So very, very interesting news taking place this weekend.
And drama with Kamala. Is there or isn't there? Here's Jeff Kuhner from the Kuhner Report talking about something that we're hearing from multiple angles. And I don't mean independent little posts on X. We're hearing people in the media talk about it as well, that there is infighting between the Biden camp and the Kamala camp going on right now. And there's been internal polling that they look out that see her losing the support of African-American men and Hispanic men. So a lot of drama going in there. And is it showing up in some of the polls? Well, we think there is a little bit. Let's roll into it.
So let's go ahead and dive into the national polls. We can see that as of the most recent data available from the 9th of October, Trump is now taking a 4-point lead ahead of Kamala. We can see that he's on an upwards trajectory, whereas when it comes to Kamala, her numbers have remained very, very stagnant, ranging anywhere between 45 to 50, but not surpassing that.
That's correct. And so we have been seeing this 3-point spread, give or take, for Trump being consistent. Now, what's very interesting about this is the popular vote has been won by the Democrats in the last several presidential elections. The Republicans have won the Electoral College, which represents, of course, the congressional representation state by state, which comprises the Electoral College. So that's the reflection of it. The will of the people represented state by state versus the will of the people on a national basis, where California and New York's population overwhelm the popular vote itself. Now, what's interesting in this, we're also going to be coming at you a little bit later this week with a segment that we're going to do with Mark Mitchell from the Rasmussen Report. Look for that on Friday.
Now, you asked for it and we're bringing it to you. We've been reading your comments and you want to know about the betting market odds because historically, these things have often ended up being pretty accurate. They predicted the last election, the 2020 election with Biden winning with pretty good accuracy. So now let's take a look at what we're seeing with the betting odds when it comes to Trump versus Kamala. Shockingly, we can see about an 8.5% spread right now between Trump and Kamala. At one point earlier last week, I believe it was up to like 11, which was the largest spread it's been throughout the entire duration of this race. Still, Trump is holding very steady right now. When we take a look to all of the various swing states, we can see that it's a close race in some areas, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada. However, we can see that Trump is taking either a moderate to strong lead when it comes to Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania.
And these leads are not represented by polls, they're representing by the aggregate of bets being placed on places such as PolyMarket.
And now we roll into some brand new polls which have been released from none other than Wall Street Journal. Now we know that this publication tends to have a little bit of a left lean, so it was very interesting to see some of the results that have come out. Now it definitely wasn't from the best sample. This is from registered voters. There's 600 of them. We usually like to look at likely voters. However, it can still provide us some insight as to what's going on right now. The most surprising of all of these different states happens to be the 5-point lead that was taken by Trump in Nevada. The last several weeks, when we've been diving into the polls, we've seen this as a little bit more of a toss-up. Obviously, Kamala has imitated many of the policies that Trump has suggested for the people of Nevada, and so the competition has been pretty tight. It's been razor-thin margins through the last several weeks. However, we can now look to this and see, maybe Trump is starting to take a little bit more of a lead in Nevada.
Now, as you read polls, look for two things. When you hear polls, you're reading an article, this is a couple things to look for. Do they include the undecideds? And was that a head-to-head poll, or did it include the Green and Libertarian parties? As you can see, the Wall Street Journal included both of the main candidates, of course, but also the undecided and the minor parties, Libertarian, Green, and what have you. And if you take a look at the 6 undecided in Arizona and look at 45-47 Trump, that's only 92. So the 6 undecided, if it broke for Trump, this poll would match so many of the others. So it's not necessarily that the Wall Street Journal poll is wrong or counter to other polls. It's that you dive in and you see what else is going on in that poll. Now then, what was also interesting is the Wall Street Journal asked people what their top issues were.
And it was pretty indicative of many of the other data points we've looked at so far. We can see that Trump is dominating on any areas when it comes to things like the economy, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to immigration. And as per usual, Kamala was dominating in the areas of women's reproductive rights and healthcare. Now, the big shocker here was actually the last one, stands up for the American worker. Now, this tends to lean Democrat. Obviously, all of the unions, they tend to see the Democratic Party as the ones who are standing up for the rights of the American worker. But as we've seen with many of the stories that have come out, Teamsters not making that endorsement, it's now reflecting in some of the data here. We can see that Trump is up at 47 compared to Kamala's 45, so he's taking a 2-point lead on that issue too.
And we've already mentioned the Border Patrol Union endorsing Trump, and then 58% of the Teamsters, the rank and file, endorsing Trump, leading the Teamsters not to endorse any candidate this go around because their membership was so leaning to the Republican candidate. Now then, let's go to the swing states. This is all brought to you by VT News. You can go to vtnews.ai every morning and see these and their updates. We start with Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania slows a slight lead for Harris. Now, we don't think that that is actually going to stand up, because what we are looking at is the last 5 polls, and there is an outlier in here, which is Harris 3 points from New York Times Siena, which is definitely a left-leaning poll. When you move the left out and you see Trump 1, Trump 2, Trump 1, Harris 0.02, then the summation of the last 5 polls, as far as we would see, Trump would have about a 1.5% lead in Pennsylvania. Now, it's incredibly difficult to poll now. People are on telephone polling and cell phone polling, a little bit of email, a little bit of voluntary, a little bit of door-to-door. It's incredibly difficult for the pollsters right now with a very tired populace, many of whom have had repeated polling attempts going back to the primaries at the beginning of the year. So as it gets more difficult to get polls, it's also more difficult to get good polls. And we believe that Trump is actually ahead in Pennsylvania by as much as 3.5, yet the most recent polls with their leans shows a calculation of 0.2 for Harris. But if we were to go in and somewhat arbitrarily, but using science, take the lean out of the New York Times and take the lean out of Quinnipiac, or the error out of Quinnipiac, who's been historically one of the least accurate national pollsters, guess what? You come back to this 1.5 to 2 point here based on the polls. So that's how you look at it. Now, anything could happen between now and the election, and it usually does. But let's walk through the rest of the swing states and see where it appears to be leaning on the last most reputable polls today.
Yeah, and so diving into Georgia, we can see that Trump is maintaining a 1-point lead overall when we look at the aggregate. Now, the only poll here that shows Kamala in the lead is, of course, from that Wall Street Journal poll, the one that we discussed earlier. We can see that Harris is up by 2 points. However, remember, there's a 4-point margin of error here and is made up of 600 registered voters. Again, not our favorite sample space to usually refer to. However, when we take a look at the rest of them, aside from one tie from insider advantage with 800 likely voters, we can see that Trump is taking the lead anywhere between 1 all the way to 5 points on the Quinnipiac poll. And now moving on to the Nevada polls. Again, we have that surprising Wall Street Journal poll that here shows Trump actually up by 6. This is due to the fact that this specific poll doesn't calculate any of the independent candidates, much like Tom was saying earlier. So when they calculated the split and they just did a Trump versus Harris, at least 1% of that undecided or independent vote did move for Trump. 2 leads for Harris by Emerson and also Atlas Intel, which is known to be one of the most reputable pollsters. And then finally, Trump up by 1, according to Insider Advantage.
Now, rolling into North Carolina, the pollsters are leaving out a critical issue. We are all still waiting to see, first, that help and assistance gets to Asheville and the areas that were so horribly affected by the hurricane. That's the first thing on everyone's mind. As they get cleaned up over the coming weeks, the next question is, are their votes going to be counted, and what do they feel about the government that's done such a horrible job of getting supplies and relief to them? So that is going to play into North Carolina. There is as much as 50,000 voters out there that have been heavily affected by the storm. Mail, parcels, packages, FedEx, United States Postal Service, all were severely flooded and damaged in that area. So did those votes get in? Did those mail-ins make it back? We don't know. Are they going to be able to get to polling places? We don't know. But it's tough to put the priority on voting when you've got people that are trying to get shelter, relief, and supplies. So in the outlying areas in North Carolina, this could be an incredible wild card for an incredibly important swing state, which currently sits now at about Trump 1.1 based on these last 5 polls. However, we are feeling pretty comfortable at Trump at about 2.5 to 3, but we're gonna have to wait and see, can those votes get to the tabulation centers?
And so now it's time for our Valuetainment Call. This is the culmination of all of the data that we just showed you, plus our own aggregate through VT Analytics to bring you our call just 3 weeks from the election. So with 3 weeks to go, Tom, what are we seeing?
We believe there's a 75% chance that Trump will win the Electoral College. We have got North Carolina in a swing state position right now because of the things we just talked about with voters able to get to the polls. 40,000 votes would matter. But we also have more polling indicating that Nevada, is leaning toward Trump. Now, in the ultimate analysis, the turnout will determine everything. And a strong turnout in Las Vegas could likely turn Nevada blue at the time of the election. But right now we have got 271, which is, if it finished this way, with these states not tabulated, Trump would have 271 to win and Kamala Harris 226. Now, when you add this back up, it will be more close than that, but it shows you the various paths to victory that lie in the Electoral College. But what we find very notable is that Trump has more paths, it seems, than Kamala, who needs to depend on flipping Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia blue on election night. As we continue to say and continue to believe, if those go red or are leaning red by 11 p.m., when polls are closing out west and there's been plenty of tabulation time on the east, that spells trouble for Kamala Harris, and it could spell victory for Donald Trump. But that's how we see it. That's what the numbers are saying. Words talk, numbers scream, and this is what the numbers are saying at this hour.
Join us next week as we dive back into the polls and show you the data just 2 weeks from the election. Plus, is there going to be any type of October surprise? We've heard some very suspicious things about Tim Walz come out recently that don't sound too good for the Harris campaign. So how will that affect the polls as well? Is there going to be any more information coming out on that? You'll have to tune in next week as we give our analysis on that as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Amy Dangerfield.
And I'm Tom Ellsworth, the Biz Doc. On behalf of Valuetainment and VTnews.ai, your source for news where you see which way it spins. We'll let the candidates talk, we'll let the spin meisters spin, and we'll let the numbers scream. See you next week.